Hi, this is Ken McCarthy at RealEconTV.com, and we're going to initiate a new program, interviews, audio interviews with people that I know, admire, and respect, and who've got interesting things to say about the state of the world and the state of the economy and the state of where things are headed financially. And today we've got a good friend. We've had a lot of conversations off the record over the months, and I thought, wow, this stuff's just too good not to share with you. And I'd like to introduce you to him. His name is Rob Cohen. Hey, Rob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good to speak with you.
Great. Welcome. Rob, I'm going to give your background very briefly and correct me where I'm off base. You trained formally as an economist, yes?
Yes.
And
yes.
Where did you get your training in economics?
I trained at NYU, and it was a very interesting, unusual experience that I had there. I was given a scholarship and a fellowship there by the Austrian School of Economics. And the Austrian School of Economics at the time was practically unknown. It was the School of Economics that started in the 1800s and continued through about that time. It was really pretty much out. They were considered free market economists that were based deeply philosophically, which is very different than other economics. They were really concerned with epistemology. How do we know whether something is true? And they tried to ground their economics in reality. And at the same time I was taking that program, I was also in the standard mainstream economics of NYU, which was based in nothing, as I found out. Well, I shouldn't say actually nothing. It was a very enlightening and disillusioning time for me. In my very first class, I saw them put a big economic equation up on the board. And, the professor went through the equation, and as I was looking at that equation, I saw there were tons of assumptions in there that made absolutely no sense to me. And at the end of the class, I spoke with the professor, and we went through the equation together, and he felt very sorry for me that I saw how many holes there were in economics, just starting out. And he thought that was going to lead to a bad end for me. And he didn't realize it till he was already teaching. So it would be very hard to go through.
Yeah, so basically, very early on in your training as an economist, you saw that some of the fundamental so-called principles that underlie the whole science were bogus.
No, absolutely. It was very clear to me. I mean, to have full disclosure, I came into the program very interested in the nature of knowledge. And I was already very clear that there was something very wrong in the way all of our academic disciplines are organized. I didn't understand what was underneath it at that time. Now it's much clearer to me. But I did know very clearly that if you were going to try to understand physics, let's say, or engineering, it required a different outlook than economics or health. If you're looking at something which just has the way mass and gravity work together, the quality of elements, particles, it's very different than when you're working with consciousness. And when you're working with people, there is consciousness. An economic system cannot be reduced to equations because people are going to act in ways that are not predictable from their past actions. If you take a rock and you drop it on planet Earth 1,000,000 times over hundreds of thousands of years, it's going to fall in the same way. It's going to have the same relationship to gravity. But a person, if you put an ice cream cone in front of them, on a hot day when they're hungry, they may react to it very differently than if it's freezing cold. And it's not just on a hot day when they're hungry, but they've had a lot of ice cream, they're going to respond to it differently. You're never going to get all the factors from past action that's going to predict what's going to happen in the future. They saw economics. I mean, their basic definition of economics, especially Ludwig von Mises, who really brought it all together. He said that economics is the study of human action under conditions of scarcity, and he then developed a whole economics out of that. And he did a fantastic job, and it was brilliant. And it wasn't until later that I saw what the flaw was and the limitation in what he did. And now it's very interesting to me that, the Austrian school is now the darling of the Tea Party and the Republicans. The Austrian school, back when I was in graduate school, was dismissed as being ridiculous. And now it's being used by the right wing because the Austrian school came up with a number of conclusions. And one of the conclusions was that government intervention always makes matters worse. It never achieves its end because government intervention will always have unintended consequences. If you have a free market with people interrelating and you have supply and demand equalizing and reaching equilibrium, then you have true economic calculation where the right amount of goods and services are brought to bear to produce, and the market will be cleared. Now, I'm jumping through economic theory very quickly, but just the place where Austrian economics and all capitalist economics totally falls apart and loses its relevance for today's world is that all of their science was based on the fact that when supply and demand come together, there is equality between all the actors, and that supply and demand will happen through natural calculation of individual actors, and each individual actor is equal. If that was the case, capitalism would be the perfect system. But we do not have that in the real world. In the real world, you have a situation where there is power. Corporations, government, they make decisions and then they change what's happening. I mean, today, if we come to, a time like today, we see that corporations will pass laws. Well, they don't pass laws. They will pay the lobbyists. The lobbyists go in there, and they wind up getting legislation that is not based on free market. It is no longer a free market. It's a purchased market. The playing field is no longer level. Back at the turn of the century in this country, the labor unions developed to try to help to level the playing field, to give workers some power in relation to their employers. Back then, the employers had absolutely no benefits, and they were terrible wages, and if they didn't like it, like in the coal mines, they would actually beat them, they would jail them, they would do all sorts of things to get them to work at their rates while they were making, large profits. The labor unions, which were an attempt to level the playing field. The playing field has never been level. There has never been. The capitalist system, as put out in the economic textbooks, is a pipe dream. It's an abstraction of what is theoretically possible, but in the real world, if you have money, you have power, you want to maintain and extend your profits, and you're going to do what's necessary to get that. And each actor who does that, he thinks, well, it's just me. But when it becomes throughout the whole system, it winds up destroying the system, and we have a lot of the inequalities and the messes that we have today.
And it's a very convenient myth for the people that do run the system, because everybody's running around thinking, hey, this is an even game, and I'm going to give it my all. I mean, we have to give it our all anyway. It's just the nature of human survival. But there's this illusion that it's an essentially fair game, and it's a meritocracy, and he who creates the best product, he who provides the best service, they're going to succeed. Where actually there's a lot of game rigging going on in the background via lobbyists that sometimes put good businesses and good industries out of business while giving unfair advantages to not so good businesses.